Okay, so I'm going to be talking about changes that I think would be interesting, and this was pretty much because I have played the game a lot, and, I'd like to see some things improved upon, or at least changed up a little bit to help the game feel more like a hunt than currently, because nothing really feels like a hunt, almost at all, in Monster Hunter Rise. In World, sometimes it felt like a hunt, especially when you had to, track the monster around. When it was, you know, if it's a brand new monster, you don't know where it is on the map, and so you have to constantly search for tracks, and you can find the monster that way, and it really felt like a hunt. But there isn't really anything like that in Rise, and it makes it feel like just a regular fight rather than an actual hunt. So, but anyways, I was going through the crafting list in Monster Hunter Rise, and I passed by the different kinds of drug meat that you have. And I thought to myself, in both Monster Hunter games I played, World and Rise, I played a little bit of Generations Ultimate, but not enough. And in both of those games, I never felt the need to ever use those because there isn't a reason to. And I would like to change that, and I think there is a way to do that. And so I thought of a change that could be made that I think would be really cool. And there are a lot of things that I also would like to be changed to go along with this, but essentially the change is when you start a hunt and the monster sees you for the first time and roars, you should be able to take your piece of drugged meat and throw it into the monster's mouth and get them affected with the status effect as soon as the hunt starts. But you have to wear earplugs so you're not flinched by the roar, or else you can't do it, right? I think that that would be fairly interesting. But I think that being able to immediately inflict a monster with a status effect without having to attack them at all would be kind of strong. Now you can already do that to some degree with the different kinds of toads that are around, right? The paralyzed toad, sleep toad, poison toad, that kind of thing. So it's not too big of a deal, but I would say that's mainly because you have to go out of your way to get those, but if you could just simply bring an item with you that lets you do that, that might be a little bit too strong. And so I think they'd have to kind of change how status effects work. And so I decided to think up some changes that could be made to pretty much all of the status effects. And so essentially the way it would work is instead of proccing sleep or paralysis or any of the other status effects once and having that cause the effect, instead I was thinking, what if you needed 3 procs of the status effect in order for it to take effect? So essentially what it would do is it would cause well, first of all, it would reduce the amount of status effects that you could get realistically in a hunt, which I think is a good thing because status effects are kind of strong. Both sleep and paralysis are pretty ridiculous. And so essentially the way it works is I'm going to use paralysis as the first example. I'll go through all of them though. So, the first time you proc paralysis, instead of the monster being completely immobilized, instead the monster should flinch every time it goes for moves that either take a lot of time to do or do a lot of damage. Right? And so that's the first level. The second time you proc paralysis, the monster should have a small window of paralysis about a second after each move or attempt at a move. And the third time you proc paralysis should just be complete immobilization, how it is currently. And the reason that I think there should be separate stages for each of the status effects is because, first of all, I always found it jarring to just be attacking a monster with, a paralysis weapon, and then just have them completely freeze out of nowhere. And so it never really sat well with me. And so I would like to see our status effects have different effects before the complete immobilization, so that way you really get the sense that, okay, you're doing something to the monster that is causing them, a lot of grief, right? So with paralysis, they start like, twitching and spasming, beforehand, and then it's just complete immobilization, how it is currently, right? Because you can see when they're paralyzed, they're like constantly twitching and stuff. And so I would just like there to be a gradual build-up that has an actual effect on the monster before the complete paralysis, right? And obviously the time it takes to proc paralysis should go up every level. So, the first proc is easy to get, the second one takes a bit longer, and the third even more so. Once again, to kind of limit the amount of times that you can do this. And also, the resistances for the monster should also probably be changed as well to coincide with that. And I think it should be this way for pretty much all of the status effects. All of the status effects should have 3 levels that cause different effects at each level. Except for Blast. And I'll explain why later, but I'm going to just talk about Poison. So, the first proc of Poison should start doing damage to the monster, but it should be low damage, and the time between damage should be fairly long. So it should be weak and also kind of slow acting. And the second time you proc Poison should speed up the time between damage ticks and do more damage. And the third proc should cause the monster to enter a state similar to exhaustion. Basically, the monster becomes delirious from the poison and can, injure itself trying to hurt you, right? I think that would be kind of interesting to see, because once again, it doesn't really make sense that you can poison a monster and it takes damage, sure, but that's basically it. It doesn't seem to have any other effect other than it's just, doing damage over time to it. So I'd like to see it have an actual effect on, like, how the monsters move and, that kind of thing. And Sleep, the first proc should cause the monster to leave its enraged state, if it's in it, and lose track of your character for a bit, like it's drowsy. And if it sees you again, it'll basically be like resetting the fight. The second proc should slow down the monster and weaken the strength of its attacks. And the third proc is it falls asleep, alright? And for Exhaust, the first proc should decrease the amount of moves the monster can do without pausing. The second should slow the monster down and make it pause longer after attacks. And the third proc should cause the monster to search for the nearest food source so it can get some energy back. And this would actually make setting up traps with raw meat actually useful and that kind of thing, because if you're going to use an exhaust weapon and you prepare beforehand, then you can just set up a trap and, put raw meat over it, so that way when you fully exhaust the monster, it goes over to your raw meat and it steps on the trap and you get another damage window, right? But I also think monsters should be programmed to avoid traps naturally, and so that way that would also give a reason to use raw meat at all, because there isn't a reason to. And with the change I suggested with being able to throw the different kinds of drugged meats into monsters' mouths when they're roaring, I think that way every one of those items would have a use case besides just a gimmick, basically. They would actually be helpful items rather than how they are now, which are items that no one uses, basically. And the reason I didn't talk about Blast is because I don't really think there is a way to change Blast to give it 3 different stages. The only way I could think of doing that is having it function similarly to Teostra, where he will set down essentially like Blast Dust and then activate it. Like, you could do that, I guess. So, like, the first proc of Blast puts one thing, one Blast Dust effect on the monster. The other proc puts another, and the third one, detonates it. That kind of thing, right? But I think it'd probably be better to just leave Blast alone. I just can't think of any other way to change it. And also, with this kind of status effect change, I think that the drug meats should also change, and so maybe, and also the paralysis toads, the endemic life that also cause these status effects, I think they should also be changed. So the drug meats and the different endemic life with these effects should probably put the monster into level 2 of whatever status effect you use, and so that way you only have to proc the status effect once before getting the 3rd level. So that way, the monster's resistance doesn't go up as much. But anyways, I think that's pretty much all that I wanted to say. It's just a thing I was thinking about. I thought would be interesting. Of course, it's unlikely to happen, and maybe it's not even really a good change. I just thought it was interesting. There's a bunch of things that would need to be changed as well, like the different skills and all that stuff. But I just kind of got bored basically and was just looking around, and it's like no one ever uses these frickin' drugged meats, and so I was kind of just thinking about that a lot, because I really want there to be a bigger focus on the hunt aspect in these games, and the way to make the hunt feel more like hunts is to have more preparation stages, both in and out of combat. That's like the easiest way to do it. So preparing beforehand by making sure you bring all the items that you plan on using and that kind of thing, and then during the hunt, of course, setting up your traps and that kind of thing, and setting up bait, that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I like the fast pace of Rise, but once again, the fights don't feel like hunts. They just feel like fights. And it's called Monster Hunter, right? So the fights should feel like hunts, but currently they don't. And so I just want to see that changed. But hey, whatever.